Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping ourselves in for what feels like a very emotionally charged session.
It definitely does.
We're going to take a really unflinching look at one of the most dedicated and I think recently one of the most despairing fan bases in English football.
Yeah.
We are diving deep into the collective existential crisis that seems to be gripping Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah.
Specifically in the wake of a recent, well, a truly shocking performance.
It was more than just a loss, wasn't it? It felt like a psychological trauma captured live on camera. We're looking at a huge stack of these incredibly candid, immediate fan reactions. And the emotion here is just, it's so intense. It's not the standard, post-loss anger.
Right.
It's this deep, weary frustration that suggests the supporters feel like they're just witnessing a structural failure play out. Again.
Absolutely. And the match that sparked all of this, it provided the perfect, almost horrific microcosm of everything that worries their supporters.
Yeah.
The defining feature wasn't even the final score. It was the sheer speed of the collapse.
Oh, the speed was breathtaking.
I mean, we're talking about a team going 2 goals down to Fulham within the first 6 minutes of play. 6 minutes. And then almost conceding a third by the 11th.
It's unbelievable.
That kind of rapid implosion, it doesn't just lose you 3 points. It makes your entire fan base sit there and question their life choices.
And that horrific opening sequence is really the crucible from which this whole conversation emerges, isn't it? The immediate sentiment we've pulled from the sources is just so blunt, so straightforward, full of self-loathing, really.
Yeah, phrases like,
"We are just rubbish." And that quickly spirals into the most desperate universal question in all of football fandom. Why do we even watch this team anymore? That's the emotional weight we're dealing with here.
that's the core pain point.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to methodically unpack the 3 main theories that are just dominating the Spurs fan conversation right now. We're trying to figure out where the blame truly lies.
Right.
Is this fundamentally a problem with the manager, Thomas Frank, and his tactical approach? Is it purely a lack of quality, confidence and cohesion within the current playing squad?
Or, and this is the bleakest one, is it something far deeper?
Exactly. Is this a rotten core problem that's just inherent to the club's DNA, to its very structure, regardless of who is in charge?
We have to start right at the scene of the crime, don't we? This dreadful opening minutes. The immediate fallout was just so extreme because the errors weren't. They weren't ambiguous at all. They were specific, glaring, individual mistakes that led directly to goals.
Okay, let's unpack this opening trauma then. Section 1, immediate fallout. Detailing how quickly it all just fell apart. When fans are saying things like, what did I just witness? What specific moments are they actually referring to?
Well, they're referring to a perfect storm of individual errors, all compounded by what looked like a collective mental shutdown. It's the sheer lack of resistance, the lack of organization in those first few minutes.
That's collapse.
It is. The feeling among supporters was truly one of disbelief and, crucially, a sense of having seen this exact movie before. The total capitulation under the first sign of pressure.
And what really stands out in the sources is the intense and actually quite conflicting scrutiny directed at one man in particular, the goalkeeper, Guglielmo Vicario. It sounds like he's either a convenient scapegoat or genuinely a major part of the problem.
It's fascinating because the fan base is genuinely split, which I think reflects the wider instability at the club. On one side, the criticism is incredibly harsh. I mean, we see him described as shoddy, a clown, and frantic in his decision-making.
Frantic is a good word for it.
It is. And the major technical complaint is that he plays so far out of his goal, which, when that's combined with slow defensive reactions in front of him, it just leaves the net completely exposed.
It's that high-risk, high-reward modern keeper dilemma, isn't it?
Right.
But when it fails, the results are absolutely catastrophic.
Exactly. And fans noted that in the chaos, he seemingly tried to deflect blame onto his teammates, which just amplified their frustration.
That never goes down well.
Never. And one very pointed comment suggested this was just glaring incompetence. It also contained a truly brutal assessment of his recruitment. The line was, "Nobody challenged us for his signature."
Wow, okay, that one quote, "Nobody challenged us for his signature." That goes beyond the player, doesn't it?
It does.
That suggests the fan base has totally lost faith in the scouting department, not just the keeper. They're basically implying that other elite clubs saw a fundamental flaw that Tottenham missed right at the recruitment level.
Precisely. It turns the focus from a single player's mistake to the organizational competency of the entire club. However, to keep it balanced, the counter-arguments are equally strong, and they're very defensive of Vicario.
So what is defenders saying? What's the other side of the coin?
They're very quick to insist that, overall, he has been one of our best players this season. They under that without some of his exceptional saves in other games, the team would be significantly lower down the table.
Okay, so they're looking at the bigger picture.
They are. They argue that the act of booing him for a mistake is crazy, stressing that the chronic, deep-seated flaws lie with the players immediately in front of him, with the defensive line.
So he's being scapegoated because he's the last line of defense.
That's their argument. He's the one left exposed when everything else breaks down.
And that's the essential conflict, isn't it? Is the error an outlier, a one-off mistake from a good player? Or is it evidence of a systemic flaw in his game? But as you said, the defensive line certainly offered plenty of evidence for that latter theory.
Oh, absolutely. When we look at the specific failures that created those early goals, the defensive line just crumbled. We saw these individual disasters stacking up one after another, making that feeling of incompetence almost overwhelming for the fans watching.
So who are the individuals the fans are really singling out for those early disasters?
Destiny Udogie came under some really heavy fire for a specific, painful sequence of events.
I think I know the one you mean.
Yeah. He receives the ball under counterattack pressure. He miscontrols it, slips quite dramatically, fouls the opposition player, and then picks up a booking. It's just a rapid-fire catalog of fundamental errors.
Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
In a few seconds, yes. You've got technical failure, then physical collapse, and then the disciplinary consequence all rolled into one moment.
That's the kind of sequence that just demoralizes an entire stadium. It makes the team look physically and, technically unprepared for the moment.
And then you have some of the less marquee players, like Danso. His inclusion is cynically noted by one fan as being only in the team because he throws long, which suggests a sort of desperate tactical dependency on a set-piece novelty rather than actual footballing ability. And then that same player misplayed what was described as a simple 5-yard pass, which immediately started a detrimental opposition move that the team just never recovered from.
These aren't complex errors, are they? These are errors of concentration and basic competence.
That's what's so galling for the fans. And it's not just isolated moments either. When we look at the regular starters, Christian Romero, who's supposed to be this aggressive defensive leader.
Supposed to be.
Yeah. He's noted as being brilliant when he can be bothered, which just suggests a profound inconsistency in his application from game to game.
Not what you want from your leader at the back.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And Pedro Porro is explicitly called a horrific defender in the sources, noted for being wildly inconsistent since his arrival. The fan base seems to have zero confidence in the positional integrity of their fullbacks when they're put under any kind of pressure.
Is there anyone who comes out of this with any credit?
It's telling that Mickey van de Ven is the only one who's really spared. He's described as genuinely our only decent defender. The only one.
So if you have these fundamental errors happening across multiple players, coupled with inconsistency from your supposed leaders, this leads fans right back to the deepest, darkest question that seems to haunt the club, the mentality question.
Exactly. When individual failures are this frequent and they occur at such high-pressure moments, especially right at the start of a match, it just confirms for fans a long-standing suspicion.
Which is?
The mentality of the team is rubbish and has been for the most part for a very long time. This is what they call the psychological illness of the club, the mental rot.
Right. And if the mentality is rotten, as the fans are claiming, then the logical next step is to ask who is responsible for fostering that mentality. And here is where it gets interesting, because fans argue that if this mental rot is so deep-seated, they believe managerial changes become completely futile.
That's the profoundly pessimistic conclusion they draw from just historical observation. They argue that the rot just stays, regardless of the person in the dugout.
It's embedded in the culture of the dressing room.
That's the theory. They've seen managers come and go, some defensive, some attacking, some cautious, and yet the moment the team faces a bit of adversity, that collective psychological weakness just reasserts itself. It suggests that unless the club completely overhauls the type of personality and leadership they sign, success is impossible, because any new manager just inherits a culturally fragile squad.
That's a really powerful assessment, and it transitions us perfectly into Section 2, which is dedicated to the man currently tasked with managing that very fragile culture, Thomas Frank. It's the managerial crossroads where all this external pressure meets the internal analysis.
And the knee-jerk reaction after a loss like this is always to call for the manager's head. And Thomas Frank is absolutely in the firing line. The emotional response is quick. He's proper rubbish. He has to go. And he's clearly out of his depth. The feeling is that he has approached well over half the games incorrectly, which suggests his overall strategic judgment is what's flawed.
But the critique from the fan base is far more sophisticated than just general anger, isn't it? They're doing their own deep dive, really articulating how Frank is tactically failing. So let's move beyond the general criticism and explore the specifics of the tactical failures they've identified.
Yeah, and the primary tactical failure they point to is this profound lack of central progression. If you look at the really successful teams, they have midfielders and even central defenders who are capable of breaking the lines vertically straight into the attacking third.
The killer pass.
Exactly. For Spurs, fan observations note that the offensive approach is just overly simplistic and predictable.
One fan hilariously dubbed it the ball to kudos and inshallah strategy.
Yes. Which basically means everything funnels wide to their one creative spark, Kudus, and then they just hope he can conjure something out of nothing. It's an admission that there's no system, no pattern designed to exploit the central areas of the pitch where the most dangerous passes are actually made.
And the data they're citing to back this up is, it's truly shocking. It's so revealing of a really risk-averse approach.
It is the ultimate indictment. The supporter cited statistics showing almost zero forward passes in their pass maps, which is why their expected goals, their XG figures, remain consistently low despite the fact they often dominate possession in non-threatening areas.
All sideways and backwards.
Pretty much. But here is the stat that should make everyone just pause for a second. Tottenham has reportedly made only 4 through balls. All season.
Okay, say that again. 4.
4 through balls all season. That's not just poor execution, that suggests a tactical mandate against taking a risk.
That is genuinely astonishing.
It is, and the fans contextualized this devastatingly. They noted that one opponent, Como, made 5 through balls in a single match.
So one team did more in 90 minutes than Spurs have done all year.
Exactly. When your seasonal output in the most incisive, line-breaking pass is less than another club achieves in one game, it signifies a complete systemic failure to even attempt to create high-value opportunities. It shows a fundamental reluctance to play vertically.
And for a team that's aiming for the top 4, avoiding vertical passes means you're sacrificing the very element of surprise you need to break down low blocks or exploit spaces in transition. So if the system is designed to avoid risk, then this ties into another fan worry that Frank went against his beliefs.
That's the internal conflict at the heart of the Frank debate. His prior success elsewhere was built on tight defensive principles, on structure, on prioritizing security above all else.
Right.
But when he arrived at Tottenham, the theory is he may have caved to pressure for an attacking Tottenham style, thereby abandoning his own strengths and landing himself in this tactical no man's land. He's trying to be something he's not, and the result is this sterile offense married to a mentally brittle defense.
Beyond the overall style, there are also some specific selection issues that fans are scrutinizing, aren't there? Particularly in that midfield area.
Yes, selection is a major flashpoint. Critics question the continued selection of Paulinho against certain opponents, particularly given the acknowledged lack of a truly progressive passer in that midfield.
Right, the very thing they need.
The only one noted in the entire backline is Romero, and he's a defender. So if you lack players who can break lines from deep, why do you keep selecting a player who is primarily a destroyer and who might actually stifle the buildup?
So the argument is that he's prioritizing protection over creation, even when the opponent is basically inviting them to come and attack.
Precisely. And then the fans get into this debate about the fate of players like Johnson and Xabi Simons. Simons, in particular, is seen by some as potentially having the quick feet and the vision of a playmaker, a necessary dribbler. But Frank isn't utilizing him fully.
But there is a counter-argument to playing him more, isn't there?
There is. It's based on a legitimate physical concern that he's just too weak for the Premier League. He stands at 5'6" and has 0 goals in 17 appearances, which suggests he hasn't exactly made a strong enough case to upset the established order.
So this complexity weighing creativity against physicality, possession versus progression, it shows that the fan critique is deeply engaged with the managerial decision-making. But now we hit the inevitable patience paradox. After all this scrutiny, is there a strong, rational counter-argument to the impulse to just sack Frank immediately?
Absolutely. And this is vital for the club's long-term health. The strongest argument is for commitment and stability, which, Tottenham has lacked historically.
To put it mildly.
Right. Fans advocating for patience insist Frank must get at least a full season and another preseason next year. They argue that successful rebuilds just take time.
And the sources explicitly reference the most famous recent example of managerial patience, right?
They do. They point directly to Arsenal and Mikel Arteta's early struggles. Arteta was considered a disaster early on. He was facing fan unrest, poor results, heavy investment with little return. But the club backed him.
And look at them now.
Exactly. Now, Arsenal is a title challenger. The lesson there is that immediate results shouldn't derail the necessary long-term structural vision.
And there's a huge implication here that goes beyond just tactical performance. If Frank was appointed by the club's new leadership, the new regime that followed the effective departure of Daniel Levy, then firing him now is a massive statement about the institutional culture.
It's a test of whether anything has truly changed at the top. If the new leadership fires Frank after only a short period, it signals that nothing has changed. It signals they're still stuck in the old, impulsive, short-term decision-making cycle that defined the Levy era.
They'd be admitting their first major structural appointment was a failure.
Straight away. So stability is therefore critical, even if the football's really difficult to watch right now.
That's a fascinating layer. A footballing decision that's tied directly to institutional credibility. But we can't talk about managers and the fan base without discussing the lingering presence of the previous manager, Ange Postecoglou.
The ghost at the feast.
His shadow looms large because the division over him speaks directly to the club's conflicting priorities.
It causes significant fan division, it really does. The current pain is so acute that some are now asking, maybe Ange wasn't the problem, suggesting the issues are entirely systemic and squad-related.
But others are having none of that.
Not at all. Others are just as adamant that he absolutely was the problem, even if the current situation is also poor.
And the core tension here is that philosophical conflict between trophies and style of play. Which one should define Tottenham?
This is the war being fought in the stands and online. You have fans who explicitly state they would take a problem manager that is capable of winning a European trophy any day.
Result above all else.
For this faction, yes. Silverware. The tangible, historical achievement. It trumps the immediate emotional experience of watching the games. They remember the high points, like reaching the Champions League final, and they don't care how painful the team selection or the performance was leading up to it.
So winning ugly is always, always better than losing beautifully. Trophies are what go in the cabinet. End of story.
Yes, they prioritize the result. But then you have the opposing view, which recalls the absolute dross on the pitch for almost a year under him. They note that the football became repetitive, slow, and predictable towards the end of his tenure.
So they prioritize the experience of being a fan week to week.
Exactly. They argue that as bad as the current situation is, the team now is far more stable than the final period of the previous regime was, apart from, those initial few months of excitement. This whole debate is a battle between prioritizing the memory of success versus the quality of the current performance and the pursuit of a specific club identity.
And the very existence of that debate just underscores how deep and complex this crisis is. It's not just about one loss. It's about a legacy of failure, managerial identity, and these completely conflicting priorities. Right, let's move to section 3, which tackles the fundamental question. Is the manager almost irrelevant if the roster build is the root flaw?
The consensus among many supporters now is definitely shifting towards the roster build as the actual issue. It transcends the managerial hot seat entirely. They feel they are wasting Thomas Frank's time, or anyone else's time for that matter, because the raw materials just aren't good enough.
And the assessment of the squad quality in the source material is, well, it's truly scathing. Give us the core quote that really summarizes this level of disillusionment.
The fan assessment is unambiguous and weirdly numerically precise. It is. 80% of our current squad are dreadful.
80%.
80%. And this leads to the logical but very depressing conclusion that the team is mid-table regardless of manager. If you accept that premise, then the only solution is a systematic, painful rebuild that will take years to complete.
If 80% of the squad is deemed dreadful, that suggests a massive failure in recruitment and retention that must span multiple regimes. That number is just staggering. It means almost the entire starting 11 plus the bench needs replacing.
It does. And if that number is even halfway accurate, it means the immediate future of the club is bleak. You can't replace 80% of a Premier League squad in 1 or 2 windows without spending hundreds and hundreds of millions and completely destabilizing the dressing room.
And it implies the value of these players is low, making them hard to sell.
Exactly. The rebuild becomes slower and more costly.
Let's expand on this individual scrutiny across the team then, starting with what fans are calling the midfield decay.
The midfield is seen as symptomatic of the overall decline. The most devastating assessment I saw was that Bentancur has turned into Hodgberg.
Ouch. That is a truly brutal observation.
It is, given the difference in their perceived attacking attributes and progressive play. Bentancur was supposed to be the dynamic, forward-running player capable of controlling the tempo of breaking forward. To suggest he has regressed into Hodgeberg, a player fans often criticize for just passing sideways and backward, implies a complete loss of confidence or form, or perhaps lingering fitness issues that stop him from being progressive.
That suggests the engine room, which needs to be the source of that central progression we talked about earlier, has become purely reactive and safe.
Yeah.
What about the attack?
The attack is described as diabolically bad, with the exception of Kudus, who is one of the few recognized bright spots.
One they pin their hopes on.
The one and only, it seems. Concerns are raised about the persistent inconsistency of Richarlison, who can look brilliant one week and completely invisible the next. And then there's the rather dire prognosis for two other key players. The feeling that Maddison and Solanke will never be the same as they once were.
Wow.
It suggests a permanent decline due to injury, age, or just a systemic failure to utilize their strengths.
If your marquee creative player, Maddison, and your expensive forward, Solanke, are considered permanently peaked, that represents a profound catastrophe for the club's immediate future and their transfer budget. And the need for a solid number 9 is also perpetually highlighted, a problem that goes back years and years.
It's the constant gap in the team. The lack of a reliable 20-goal-a-season striker forces the team into all these tactical compromises, and it just amplifies the pressure on the midfielders and the wide forwards. But the fan blame is now extending beyond the players and the manager to the architecture of the club itself.
And this brings us to the roster build accountability, the non-playing personnel who should be creating the long-term strategy for the club.
This is where that institutional doubt starts to creep back in, testing the credibility of the so-called new regime. Fans express a lot of concern and frustration over the perceived mistake of bringing back Johan Lange, when supporters thought that the decision-making up top would change with the new regime. Bringing back a familiar face was seen by some as a regression, a return to old habits, an immediate lack of imagination. It suggests that even the attempt at structural change wasn't radical enough.
If the fans lack faith in the architects of the rebuild, that fundamentally destabilizes the entire project before it even starts. And that leads us to the ultimate diagnosis, the club's rotten core and its structural issues.
This is the institutional level critique. It starts with the historical, persistent complaint that the club doesn't back managers and doesn't actually like spending money.
A tale as old as time for Spurs fans.
It is, and this isn't just about spending less than their rivals. It's about a fundamental caution that sees them miss out on key targets because they're haggling over small sums or they delay transactions until rivals can just swoop in. It's a pervasive grievance that transcends any single manager.
So they believe the club's structural DNA is just fundamentally cautious, or as they would see it, cheap.
Exactly. And it creates this perpetual cycle of buying players who are nearly good enough, rather than the finished product you need to compete immediately. And linked to that caution is the severe leadership vacuum on the pitch. The team lacks that one leader who commands respect and confidence.
We've noted that players like Romero or Vicario, while they're passionate, they can't seem to fill that role. Why is that?
Because they themselves are prone to stupid mental errors. A true captain or a field leader has to be composed, disciplined, and capable of stabilizing the team when adversity hits. Romero's aggression and Vicario's impulsivity make them unreliable anchors.
So they're often part of the problem.
Rather than the solution, yes. Especially when the team starts to panic. You need a steady hand who can command respect without being high risk themselves.
That instability, it creates a fertile ground for cynicism. And the final piece of institutional commentary, the fan speculation about the new regime's origins, it really demonstrates the depth of that cynicism.
Yes, this is pure fan theory, but its inclusion in the discourse is highly significant. One fan referenced the circumstances of Levy leaving and the speculation around it, questioning if Levy left because the owner, Joe Lewis, was facing potential legal troubles and was prepared to take Levy down with him.
And just to be clear, this is entirely unverified speculation from fans.
Completely. But the fact that fans are even discussing it shows the depth of their distrust.
It speaks volumes that they're willing to believe the club's issues stem from the highest levels of potential legal or financial instability, rather than just poor footballing decisions.
It confirms that for many supporters, the club's structure is seen as inherently opaque, suspicious, and unstable. They believe the rot goes right to the very top, which makes supporting the team not just a matter of performance, but a matter of questioning the entire organization's integrity.
We've covered the players, the manager, and the board. But what does all this instability, this disappointment, and this self-scrutiny ultimately create? It creates an inescapable existential identity. And that brings us to section 4. The existential burden. The poignant, inescapable truth that Spursy is real.
This section really captures the true emotional and psychological cost of supporting this club. It's the moment the fans move from anger to a sort of philosophical acceptance.
The ultimate identity of Tottenham Hotspur, according to the fans, is the nearly club. That is the devastatingly accurate core truth of being Spursy.
And the source material provides a truly poignant anecdote that just crystallizes this identity perfectly. It's the story of a parent trying to explain their decades of support to their 8-year-old child.
Let's reflect on that story again, because it carries so much emotional weight.
The child asks a very simple question. Are they good? The parent, wrestling with honesty and loyalty, answers simply, sometimes nearly. The child, trying to understand, repeats the core concept, nearly good. And the parent confirms, yes, nearly, that's very Spurs.
That exchange with the 8-year-old, that single line, sometimes nearly, it captures, more than any statistic or tactical critique, the absolute emotional burden of supporting this club. It perfectly encapsulates the entire cycle.
Nearly winning the league.
Nearly achieving Champions League glory. Nearly building something sustainable. It's an identity built on proximity to success, but never the possession of it.
And this perpetual state of hope, followed by crushing disappointment, has led to a bitter redefinition of the club's acronym. THFC, for many fans, now stands for Tottenham Hope Futility Club.
Hope, then futility.
Over and over, the hope builds, only for the futility to inevitably crush it.
The emotional tax of this cycle must be immense. Following Spurs is described by some as teaching young fans how to manage hope and disappointment, fostering resilience.
Resilience is certainly one way to frame it if you're looking for a positive spin. But the more cynical and arguably more honest fan response is that supporting the team will make you really, really, really hate life.
A bit more direct.
Just a bit. It's an extreme emotional roller coaster where the disappointment feels not just probable, but completely and utterly inevitable.
And when things are going this badly, fans inevitably look to the past for some cold comfort, don't they? Clinging to relics of a better time to prove that the aspiration is, or at least was, justified.
They desperately reminisce about distant achievements and the famous players who graced the pitch, the flair of Berbatov, the genius of Bale, the solidity of Loris and Modric, as evidence that the club has possessed true star quality in the past. These players represent a lost golden standard.
But those memories quickly give way to the current reality, which is deemed far less glamorous and defined by chronic underperformance.
Yes, the assessment now is sharp. The club lacks Ballon d'Or quality players, the kind that define a generation. And increasingly, fans are just resigned to the idea that Tottenham Hotspur may simply be a stepping stone club, a place players use to launch careers toward clubs that do reliably win major honors.
If the fans accept that their team is fundamentally a stepping stone, that is the ultimate surrender of competitive aspiration, isn't it? It means they view themselves as being outside the elite circle permanently.
It's a sad realization. However, despite all this disappointment, the conversation often ends on this deeply philosophical note about the virtue of loyalty.
How do they reconcile the pain with the commitment?
For many, the loyalty just transcends the results. They see it as a necessary life lesson, insisting we don't just sing when we're winning. The support is tied to family history, identity, and integrity, making it an immutable part of who they are, regardless of the existential pain it causes them.
So it's loyalty as a moral commitment rather than a conditional relationship.
That's it, exactly.
That resilience, that commitment to family history, despite all the failure, is truly what defines the Tottenham fan base right now. So let's bring all this together for our final synthesis. We've looked at 3 massive interlocking areas of instability that are causing this crisis.
First, we have Thomas Frank's significant tactical limitations, specifically that shocking lack of central progression and risk-taking, exemplified by the disastrous 4-through balls all-thousand stat. This tactical sterility completely conflicts with the need for long-term patience.
Second, we have a squad judged by its own fans to be fundamentally dreadful, with 80% being deemed below the required standard. And key players are suffering from severe inconsistency, suggesting a systemic failure in recruitment and development.
And third, there's a deep-seated institutional rot. It's characterized by a historical lack of financial backing. Questionable appointments like Johan Lange that undermine faith in the new regime, and a total leadership vacuum on the pitch that prevents stabilization during high-pressure moments.
So given these three failures, tactics, talent, and trust, what does this all mean for the immediate future? The sources in their assessment of the roster build offer a grim, long-term prognosis.
The forecast is clear, and it's consistent across the most critical fan voices. Based on the current squad quality and the institutional setup, Tottenham Hotspur is assessed as being 2 or 3 years away from being competitive for the top honors. And that's regardless of who is in the dugout right now.
2 or 3 years.
It's a long-term rebuild prognosis, not a short-term fix.
And that time scale puts an immense amount of pressure on the new regime to commit to that timeline and resist hitting the short-term panic button. Which leads us directly to our provocative thought for you, the listener, today. It's a thought that really tests the character of this new club structure.
The new club regime, the post-Levy structure, is intrinsically tied to the appointment of Thomas Frank. They put their stamp of authority on him. So if, after this latest disastrous result and the ensuing, inevitable fan outcry, the new board chooses to fire him immediately, what does that truly signal about the club's future?
Does that mean the old, impulsive, short-term decision-making structure, the very one that gave Spurs the nearly reputation, is still firmly in place? Would firing Frank immediately confirm that nothing has structurally changed and thus validate the fans' worst fears about the rotten core?
Or, on the other hand, does it mean that the new board has genuinely identified a tactical or systemic flaw in Frank's approach that is so critical, so fundamental, that ignoring it would actually be even more damaging than appearing impatient? It is a choice between maintaining institutional stability and attempting an immediate corrective measure.
And either decision seems to confirm that the rot runs deep and the path forward is fraught with peril. A challenging decision for a club that seems perpetually stuck in the cycle of hope and futility. That's the nature of this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.